I started my career working in conventional payments. I did a lot of work for Visa and American Express and other payments organizations, and working with banks in implementing products. I left that behind because I found it rather unsatisfying, because I felt that the contribution that I could make, the difference I could make, would be absolutely minimal, because at all times everything has to be conformed, compliant with everything that has gone before, going back over decades. And so the opportunity for innovation was little. So I worked with some of the original cryptocurrencies and emerging mobile phone methods of payment. And out of that came the call to do some work with mobile phone companies in East Africa in moving money around. And it was a kind of vague requirement, but based on the experience I'd had in moving money around the world in non-conventional manners, I developed a proposal, an architecture, a set of processes based on the fundamental idea that the quickest, cheapest, easiest way of moving money around is to just tell people they've moved money around, not actually do it. And that pilot service came to be known as M-Pesa in Kenya. I worked with Safaricom and Vodafone and M-Pesa from 2004 through till 2008. So once it was fully live and everything was operating normally, I moved on. But what I moved on to was particularly of interest to me, because I worked to develop an offline extension to M-Pesa in the arid lands in the north of Kenya. So essentially delivering mobile money services, but entirely offline. And we had a working prototype of that. So unfortunately, it was the case that the people who were operating M-Pesa at the time were not terribly interested in working offline, because they came from a mobile phone background. So we took that idea, and after a period of time, we ended up using the idea, extending it, developing some additional technologies around it. And we developed a service that we actually piloted in Nigeria, an identity-based payment service, which would work entirely in the offline environment. And we deployed that in the northern Sokoto state of Nigeria. And we were able to register people, give people a form of identity card. We registered 500,000 people in remote rural areas, capturing all their demographic details, capturing supporting identity documents, and giving them an offline capable card, which would biometrically identify them and enable them to receive funds. Over one season, one pilot of the service, we managed to distribute more than $19 million to those 500,000 registered farmers. It was in the agri sector. And that was hugely influential to me. It raised the questions of identity that needed to be resolved. It made it clear to me how you need to develop financial inclusion, not just through giving people the capability, but also through education, through inclusion in all steps of the process. And again, we took the same technology and we tried to deploy it in Somalia, dealing with the problems of bank de-risking there through a process of registration of beneficiaries of payments, identification biometrically, and tracking their usage in order to deal with all of the concerns around funding of terrorism, money laundering, etc. And again, we had a pilot service there, but we couldn't go live. Since then, I've developed a number of other pilots, but most importantly, I've developed my thinking, because I mean, I've only touched on a few points of the work I've been involved with. I've been involved with probably hundreds of financial inclusion focused projects. But what became clear to me through this work and through other work was that all of our financial inclusion initiatives have served to take the financially excluded to a position where they are financially underserved. So essentially, we've created lots of locales of financial inclusion, lots of enclaves where people can access some basic financial services, but you cannot really regard them as being included. They are limited in their function. They can only reach a relatively small circle of individuals or companies. And we need, in my thinking over the last couple of years, has been that we need to start looking at the emerging digital economy and start thinking how we can include people in that economy entirely. So start bridging those enclaves, joining them all together, so that all of those customers of MFIs, those customers of SACCOs, they can all participate on an equal basis in the broader financial sector, which the financial sector is important in itself, but more to the point, it underpins the digital economy. And if we want people to be truly included, then we have to think financial inclusion 2.0, which is all about true inclusion, true participation in the digital economy. And a great deal of my work in the last 2 years has been on developing methods to achieve exactly that. What would I change in my career path? I've always tended to be just that little too far beyond what maybe the more conservative regulators are happy with, which has meant that maybe some of these things I've envisaged or have tried haven't come off. Maybe if I'd chosen to be a little more conservative, I might have actually got a little further with some of these projects. But on the other hand, I think pushing those boundaries is probably a good thing. An ideal payment system is one that simply disappears. So you know you've paid, but you've no awareness of how or why. We're a long way from that. And it relies on the development of a number of technologies, but is also some approaches and integration across multiple elements of infrastructure. For example, I think an important step is towards payment services based on what I call pay me. So at the moment, you give somebody some attributes, your mobile phone number, your bank account number, whatever it may be, and that is where the payment goes. But why should it be so? Why can't it be just pay Paul Makin, not pay Paul Makin's account at this bank? Just pay me. And then it's up to me, if I am sufficiently empowered, it's up to me to decide where I choose to keep my money. It might be in an MFI, it might be in a bank, it might be in a mobile wallet, whatever it is, that's up to me. And more to the point, I can change it at will according to my particular needs at any one time. And that requires development of an identity infrastructure and binding of that identity infrastructure into a payment system. We've seen something like this in a number of countries. For example, in India, you could, in principle, do this through Aadhaar. In Nigeria, you can use BVN for this. And one of the key use cases I see for this is actually in social payments, in pensions, or in COVID payments, or any number of other perhaps NGO-initiated social payment element. So you want to be able to pay this individual, and it shouldn't matter where they keep their money. And this is one of the reasons why I think it's really important to integrate MFIs and SACCOs into the broader financial infrastructure, because at the moment they act in many countries as effectively second-class citizens in the financial sector. if we can bring them in, if we can interconnect them in a way where we understand the risks to them and we understand the risks to the broader financial structure, and we put processes in place to manage that risk, then I think that that should be a priority. And it's not because I particularly like MFIs or SACCOs. Yeah, they do a great job. But the driver for me is their customers. I'm interested in properly financially including their customers, not the MFIs themselves. And I go back again to the point I made earlier. This is not just about financial inclusion. This is about all those people who are notionally financially included, but actually have a mobile wallet which doesn't do a great deal of use for them, or they have an MFI account, whatever it may be. They're not truly financially included. They're underserved because they don't have that integration which would enable their true interaction with the emerging digital economy. I think interoperability is absolutely vital, frankly. It's the only way we're going to actually achieve true financial inclusion. Interoperability for me means that it doesn't matter where I keep my funds. I can financially interact with anyone else in the same country, the same economy. I, as an MFI customer, can, for example, walk into any shop, like a shop that whose owner operates a bank account, and I can use funds in my MFI account to buy something in that shop, and neither of us care where the money is held, either the source or the destination. And more to the point, you can change it at will. Interoperability is absolutely fundamental to achieving this. There are different ways of achieving it. You can make sure that everybody interconnects via, to use a vaguely technical term, point-to-point connections, creating a mesh network across the entire financial sector. Or you can do it via some sort of centralized interoperability service. Such as in Kenya, you have the IPSL, for example, which operates a real-time interconnect service. And that's another characteristic which I think is really important. If we're going to do this properly, it has to be instant, and it has to be a push payment. I should have mentioned earlier, one of the important aspects of a modern financial sector that supports financial inclusion is this idea of an instant push payment. Instant, so that if I receive the money, know I can use it straight away. And secondly, that has the effect of the sender is actually able to budget properly, because they can see precisely where their funds have gone and how quickly they went, and they're not waiting to see where the funds are actually transferred or not. And secondly, it has to be push. That empowers the customer. I push the payment to the merchant, the bill payer, whatever it is. I'm in control. So instant push payments, and that's precisely what an organization such as IPSL does. And there are other equivalents around the world. Instant push payments are becoming the next wave of interoperable switches around the world. Open standards around interoperability. Well, there's open standards and there's open source and there's closed. So that there are a number of organizations who will offer you a switch which you can use to build an interoperable service. They are proprietary products and they work very well. There's an open source solution as well. There's Mojaloop, which is an open source interoperable instant push payment switch. There are open standards. Well, there's the ISO 222 standard, which is increasingly being used to interconnect everyone together. But it's not it's not a simple answer. ISO 222 is a very complex standard with a whole set of frameworks beneath it, which are industry specific. So it's a tool overall. It's not simply an answer. It's simply a tool to edge you towards an answer. Many of the proprietary switches will use ISO 222, and certainly the open source Moja Loop will support 222. What's interesting as well is that there are a whole set of other open standards around this, around the instant payments scenario. For example, there is Open G2P, which supports social payments via instant payments switches, and it will interconnect into a range of other switches, both proprietary and open source. And of course, there's the MOSIP open source identity solution, foundational identity solution, which itself can integrate with a range of payment services, interoperable payment services. So there is quite a big open source community around instant payments, social payments, identity, all trying to work together in essentially the common good, trying to produce services, trying to support services which enable this transition to a digital economy.